So what we've tried to do in the project I'm going to talk about is really hone in about what land council controls and owns or and cares for, and how we can actually take advantage of that plantable space in terms of canopy coverage. So we're very, just to give you an indication, currently we plant 2,500 trees a year, 2,000 in streets, 5,000 in reserves. And I understand that that metric was set in place because the water tank could cope with that. The watering, the actual tank that the council has currently can cope with that regime. So not high science, but that is basically informed the tree management program. And the other thing is $540 per tree for planting. So that's site prep, that's the purchase of tree, and then 3 years of maintenance. And that's 3 years of standard watering practice in terms of water out the tank and the scheduled watering regimes. So this year we received $250,000 from Green Adelaide to actually look at accelerating that tree planting program. And council also matched that, and also got some money from federal government, where we're actually doing a bit of an accelerated tree planting program over the next 18 months to really sort of start setting some priorities about where we plant those trees. So very much looking at the right tree in the right place at the right time in the street setting. I just want to raise this point as well. While we've you know, the evidence shows that it's one of the most vulnerable canopies in Australia, we've also probably, and Mark, you can back me up here, we're probably one of the few that has done different levels of mapping through different techniques, and they're giving us different results about the baseline mapping. And I understand that there's not yet in practice the consistency of methodology for canopy mapping. So if you're going through an exercise of setting your baseline, it's quite tricky. So what we're finding at Port Adelaide, aside from just setting the generic canopy target, we're looking at tree planting indicators as well, because those are the things that we can measure and have more control over. But this just gives you flags of different results that we're getting. The last one, the 2020, is using RGB imagery and machine learning, which I'll talk about, and is an EDGE project as well. That certainly showed that we have a lower canopy than what was shown in the other results. But again, there's just disparities in methodology. So this moved us to actually look at the situation that we wanted finer grain spatial analysis to inform our tree management, and really honed in on the importance of the streetscape and park reserves and greening and heat mitigation. So EDGE was engaged to really, I think, not trial, but pilot a couple of bespoke products, which were to build that evidence base so we could take a strategic approach to growing our canopy. And that was identifying how many trees to plant based on known succession rates, our climatic conditions, what species of trees and what mix of trees to plant to ensure that resilience of the canopy over time as well. And that was done using the tree planting predictor. And then the second stage of that, which we're just completing now, is analysing the plantable space in streets. And that's really using the overlays of the heat mapping that we've already got, the canopy mapping, and some social vulnerability mapping also that we've undertaken. Recognise that there's often a disadvantage for those in the lower socioeconomic groups in terms of being able to undertake heat mitigation treatments in their own settings. And that's been done at a suburb level and generated a whole lot of new information that's going to inform our tree management program. So this is the, I don't usually put data up, but this is a useful summary. This just gives you a summary. This is work that EDGE has done with us over the last probably 6 months. This bit of the work council funded to support, so that it was to ensure that the trees that we are funded for planting from Green Adelaide and for our accelerated program is actually based on good sound evidence. We know we're planting the trees in the right place and we're planting the right trees as well. So that's just giving you some ideas, the inputs to the modelling that was done. So looking at tree growth parameters, our excess rates, rate of loss, our irrigation regime, costs, different planting mixes and scenarios for different amounts of planting per year, that then gave us a sense of modelling out how many trees we would need to plant a year to achieve particular targets and what that cost would be. So I've just highlighted, if you look number of trees planted, 3,500, that we would, if we carry that on an annual basis, we'll achieve a 35% increase to our canopy by 2050, but it will cost us in excess of $56 million. based on current costs. There's no net present value applied here, and there's no change in practice in terms of more efficient water management techniques or different sort of horticultural practices as well. But it's good information to start building the business cases for improved street tree planting. So key findings, I'll just very quickly, they're obvious ones. The importance of reserves, not just the streets, limits because we've only got so much land, the importance of partnering with state government to ensure that we can maximise planting opportunities on state-controlled land, which there is a lot of in PAE, and the importance of retaining existing canopy on private land because that's where the major losses occur as well. That's good. Street tree prioritiser was the other bit of work that has just been completed, and that's using the spatial mapping, the overlays of heat, canopy, social vulnerability to look at where there's plantable space in the streetscape across the city, where the planting opportunities, and where we should prioritise that street tree planting program. Because those of us that work in local government know that you're often reacting to community need. So this is about building the evidence base to know what the priorities are. This is just some of the metrics that are generated out of that work. And I think one that stood out for me was the proportion of canopy within the road reserve is 11%. It's not a lot of the total reserve, but that's what we're focusing in that setting at the moment, but also within the reserve setting as well. This was sort of information that gets generated from this work. This was some pre-testing that was done with Kilburn probably a year ago that will give you a sense of using the heat information for different street segments, average canopy coverage for different street segments, and then what the plantable opportunities are in the street segments, then starts helping you understand where those priorities are. And what the not yet to be released report shows, you won't be able to see much detail, but basically we've got a map of the whole city that is now prioritised the streets against those criteria. So it's looking at where the opportunities of high opportunities for mitigating heat in the urban landscape, where there's a deficit in canopy loss comparatively to other areas, and where there's relatively high social vulnerability. So this work we're now building into our tree management program. And when we put this work, when we sought the funding internally for this work, we had to go back 3 times to executive to get it, because the view was just start tree planting. Why invest in more data? So I think what has happened through this process has been really good buy-in to actually understand that the importance of investing in this sort of form of data, which Green Adelaide is also invested in, and there's a number of councils that are doing similar processes. But this is how we pitched it to our executive. What it really means that we've got the rigor around the evidence base and the financials broadly that you can start building into your long-term work financial plan and your capital work program as well, and looking for that better integration between road infrastructure decisions and also reserve management and open space management. So yeah, that's broadly where we've gone with this work, but I would say that we haven't done the work to look at in that project. We haven't really looked at the water management regime in that. We've just given some broad metrics around what it currently costs, but I think that's where the water sensitive city concept will help refine this sort of body of work that I think will get played out in different settings over time.
Maggie, excuse me, Maggie, would you mind going back 2 slides?
2?
The one with your final. Yeah, that one. Thanks.
Don't publish that.
Oh.
It's going up to council. It's going up to council in April. Yeah.
We've had a few of those slides as well from Brett as well. So
yeah.
Any of yours?
So thank you, Maggie. Can you join me in thank you? Right, we've got a couple of minutes for questions. Anyone have any questions they'd like to put to Maggie now?
I was just going to say there's a lot of focus on tree canopy, but grass actually cools irrigated grass really well as well, and that's where not so much in streetscapes, but some of those larger reserves focus on irrigation, grass, maybe putting more trees in there.
Yeah, I mean certainly the driver for this work has been around canopy. I suppose that's what I'm flagging as the sophistication for that integrated work. both around the water management regime, but also looking at the other greening elements, so taking that whole green infrastructure approach. So this is very much driven around canopy loss and looking at it, how we can maximise that heat mitigation and looking for better, I suppose, better quality, high quality public realm outcomes as well. But yeah, I think it's an early body of work, and it's certainly helping to build those internal cross-departmental discussions as well.
I have a question at the back.
A couple of slides ago, you had in the bottom that you needed some buy-in from private land.
Yeah.
And do you have any ideas about how you go about that?
So some work we've done through DAT-WEST with Macquarie University. So DAT-WEST is with Charles Sturt and West Torrens. Was really, they took our mapping work and further interrogated it to look at backyard settings. So we've now got really quite detailed mapping that applies to backyard settings, and we tried to start developing a project called Backyard. Where we could start building some sort of communications and marketing. I think it's probably a project better set at the Green Adelaide scale, at a metro scale, rather than the council. But it has been used overseas, where there's a whole lot of communication education, where people have access to that sort of material, can interpret it, and then make some decisions about their own planting and networks as well, community networks setting up around that.
So was it like a flyer, a mass sort of flyer type thing, or it just advertising in different places?
Macquarie Uni, a couple of the researchers, one was from the US and one was from Europe, and so it was a spatial platform and getting public access to that platform as well, so that people could, a bit like the heat canopy layer that we've got now at a state level, you do need to know a little bit about what you're looking at to interpret. So they'd done a bit of work to actually do the interpretation for the community, so they could start using it and have a way that they organised in a community setting.
Another question coming in over there.
Yes. Playable area, does that consider, I suppose, the actual playable surface of sports fields and ovals? or did it exclude that?
It was mainly in the streetscape.
It's all excluded. So you set up like polygons around the road reserve, but you only consider what's in the road reserve.
I think what we'll do when we release the information, everything, we'll work with Edge to make sure that there's a methodology piece there as well, so that you understand all this.
A few more hands starting to bob up. So Sharon, Elliot, and then to the front.
So Maggie, when you were talking about the figures and the numbers and the costs, and you were talking about the traditional watering regime, does that traditional watering regime mean a truck going on watering the plants, or are you talking about retrofitting with water sensitive design techniques and, like wells and whatever? Or is it just truck just coming out of the truck? There is no opportunity to use that type of thing.
So there is plenty of opportunity. That's what I'm saying. We're probably my hope is that this information will help that change as well, because certainly when we first got that $540 as a figure, it was like, what? So obviously at a service level, you've got to look for where the business improvements are, and I think that's where water sensitive urban design can start working into the financials a little bit more about where the practice change can be. Because we don't want to get to a situation where we just buy 3, 4, 5 more trucks as we build our canopy up. Yeah.
Where does council's canopy targets sit in comparison with the 30-year plan?
Sorry.
Where do council's canopy targets with this programme sit compared to the 30-year plan for canopy coverage?
So again, we are actually going to propose a 35% increase to council. We've tested it out of the formal council meeting. 35% by 2050 for citywide, but then we're setting some tree planting indicators, which will be, some will set about what council will plant, and then we will set some we've set some indicators of about what we're looking for in terms of private land holding and also state government land holding. So then we're developing the strategy around how we will then work across those sectors.
question up front.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about what is the criteria for the species selection? I guess in relation to biodiversity, whether that's got any part to play, or even also the issues that arise with deciduous trees that have been used.
So we did look at what was already in place in terms of planting regimes, but within the project setting, we did talk about looking at more climate resilient species, given that we're planting for 20, 30, 40 years for those trees to reach maturity. I think there's more work to be done, but biodiversity is certainly in there. There's a mix of species that are not endemic, but they are native species that are traditionally good for street tree planting systems. And it'd be great to get the ID planter updated, plant selector updated as well. Just with having some climate resilience dialogue in that platform would be really good.
Okay, thanks everyone for your questions, and thank you, Maggie. So Maggie will join us again at the end of the panel session. Our final speaker for the session is Julian Marchant. So Julian is a sustainability consultant with Edge. He works on a range of livable cities type projects, including work with the ACT government at the moment around different urban heat tools. Prior to that, he worked in the local government sector and NRM management with various landholders across the state. So welcome, Julian, to the stage to talk about planning tools for urban heat mitigation. We're on a clap restriction here, so we get claps at the end. Where are we? One.
Thanks, Mark. So my name's Julian. I'm a consultant with Edge, as Mark mentioned. We are a sustainability consultancy, so we've got offices in Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, soon to be Auckland and Santiago in Chile. Our mantra is all about science, strategy and storytelling. For this session, in the next 15 minutes, what we want to discuss is really looking at the need for better use of tools when we're making decisions around mitigating urban heat. We'll present 6 different urban heat mitigation tools. We'll discuss a little bit about our experience using those tools and when and where to apply a particular tool. So we know that heat is a problem, and it's something that is more front of mind for people within society. It's the media's picked it up. We see a lot of headlines like these ones presented on the screen. So what we really want to talk about is there's a range of tools out there, and at the moment there's some confusion about when, how, where to use each of those tools. So looking at the broad suite of those tools, or the ecosystem of tools, how can we apply them, when do we apply them, and what are the different contexts where we apply those? And so we're really using data to support decision making. So the first tool, I'm sure many of you have seen this one. This is looking at heat mapping. This is publicly available information. So this is captured urban heat across Adelaide, and it's available for both daytime and nighttime. And in certain areas, it's been overlaid with a greenness index, NDVI, and a social vulnerability index. So this is all about. This is the first stage of really raising awareness about urban heat being a problem and allowing organisations. So in previous roles, I've worked with a lot of schools and accessing this data. So kids get really excited when they can zoom in and see how hot their house is compared to someone else's house. So it's really applicable, and anyone can pick it up and understand red equals bad, blue equals good. Another piece of work we've done is looking at material selection. So the images you're seeing on the screen, they're taken from thermal imagery from Bowen Street in the City of Adelaide. So right next to the Flinders Street bus terminal, where they applied a number of different textures. I've been told they're definitely not paint to the road surface. And looking at the impact of applying those, what does that mean in terms of the surface temperature, but also what does that mean in terms of the air temperature in those areas? Case study number 2, we've just heard a lot about that from Maggie, so I'll skip over this quite quickly. But again, showing some different imagery around the importance of understanding where to plant trees and the impact that will have. So I'll skip over this because we've talked a lot about this. The key learning is we can combine information about plantable space, current tree canopy, urban heat, and social vulnerability to support planning decision on where to prioritise tree planting. So at the moment, I'm working on a project with the ACT government. They're really keen to look at the impact of heat within Canberra and looking at what platforms they should use to assess that heat. So to that end, we're looking at a range of different urban heat mitigation tools. The first one I'm going to talk about is Solweg. So this is quite a complex tool. You're basically measuring thermal comfort. So this tool, it requires a lot of input. So in terms of creating a model, we're looking at greenfield sites or brownfield sites and what they might look like in the future and how we can cool them down. So in order to create that model, there's quite a lot of time which is needed to build that model and then input it into something like Solweg. But it is very good at the block or allotment scale. You can gain a lot of data from it, which will provide you not just information now, but you can apply it to future scenarios. Say, in the case of the ACT government, we're applying it to an RCP 8.5 2050 scenario to better understand what the impacts might be in the future. Another tool that does something very similar is EnviMet. Again, a great tool for the block or allotment scale. It can give you a lot of information. You can even choose things like albedo of vertical surfaces. You can click on whether you want grass to be irrigated, unirrigated. So there's a lot of different options with this, and the information for an allotment that you can gain from this is huge. But whether it can be applied to a landscape scale or a precinct scale, it's not really practical. It's too time consuming. So what do we do for looking at landscape scale? There are some other tools out there. The water sensitive city target tool, which is great for looking at landscape scale. So it provides really generalized information about a broad area. So it can simulate urban morphology and green infrastructure scenarios, so extreme heat, day and heat wave assessments, so land surface temperature, air temperature, UTCI, and can also simulate climate change scenarios. So this, once again, is being applied to the 2050 RCP 8.5 scenario. The next program that I'm going to talk about is a program which is occurring in Western Sydney. It's a collaboration between 3 different organisations, and it's a cool suburbs project. And the project aims to develop a voluntary design support tool to identify the most appropriate urban heat interventions, so looking at adaptation, mitigation and resilience to existing and new developments. So the tool will provide a cool rating to a development which can be marketed by a developer, and then governments can incorporate the tool in DCPs or design guidelines as desired. So there's a number of organisations involved. WesRock is involved, Western Sydney Region Councils, Resilient Sydney and the Greater Sydney Commission. And so what are these guys really interested in? They want to build awareness within the community of this problem of urban heat, and so they've got a groundswell of support behind it. There's an aim to reduce heat through looking at the way we design buildings, the way we orientate buildings, so what we build with and how we set out and design our green infrastructure as well. Adapt, so managing exposure to heat as well, and respond to that through adaptations. So the tool is centered on providing a rating using credit categories and credits. So there's urban design, cool buildings, cool parks, cool homes, innovative technology, and cool streets. And each of those have different credits assigned to them. So things that we're looking at within open space, urban design, we're looking at open space, street canyons, so the way that streets are designed, looking at how many stories are on each street. When we talk about a street canyon, we're talking about, I guess, the form of that street. Cool buildings, so looking at how we build those buildings to be cooler, not just with the materials that we use, but what we can incorporate into that building to keep it cooler. So not just the insulation, for example, but also looking at things like vertical gardens, green roofs, things like that. So the key issue here is there's an ecosystem of planning tools, and the challenge is really knowing which one to use at what point in time. So and which tool we use for particular scales. So it's really interesting through this process of looking at, yes, each of the tools can be used at different scales, but how practical is that and how cost effective is that? And what is the timing for that? Are we looking back and wanting to change what has already been constructed? Are we using this for planning in the future? And how do we use that to try and influence our neighbourhoods? And what's the desired output in terms of thermal comfort, surface temperature, design? There's a lot of different questions which are arising through this work. So in summary, urban heat mapping provided an entry point for awareness raising and data to support planning for urban heat mitigation, and the focus is moving to landscape scale planning approaches that integrate multiple drivers of heat in a way that is aligned to a resilience approach. Planning for urban heat management requires continued refinement of how to select the right framework, tool, or data for a given context. And I'm aware that I've rushed through that, and there's a lot of information that sits behind this. So more than happy to take questions on that.
Great. Thanks, Julian. Any questions for Julian? Great. Ready to go. You skipped over a slide which is very close to my heart, and that was the one about the cool roads.
Yep.
So what's the summary? Were the treatments that you put on top actually effective?
Yeah. They're really effective in terms of surface temperature. Yeah, it's really clear. In terms of air temperature, it was because air mixes, very hard to assess, and there was nothing that was statistically significant that came from that. Yeah. But that's at a small scale. Whether a whole city was applied with a certain treatment, whether that would make a difference, we don't know. The research doesn't. There's nothing in the literature which supports that either way.
No, I was just going to say the scale issue for that size of streetscape treatment, not the
So, looking at the cool building rating order, how does that compare to something like a Green Building Council, Green Star rating, Green Star communities, things that are bigger than buildings or Green Star buildings, which try and bundle up a whole lot of sustainability considerations? Like a competitor or an adjunct or an alternative? Or...
So you're talking about the Western Sydney model? Yeah. I mean, good question. I don't know. I really don't know.
There might be a hand pass today. So actually looking for a building council potentially being the long-term owner of that tool. I think what they recognise is that while they've identified urban heat as being a major issue, it's not really adequately or sufficiently dealt with at the moment. And so there's an opportunity through an approach like this while it's been developed for Western Sydney, there's potential for them to looking at being a national approach. So that's what's been discussed at the moment between West Rockham and GCO. Yeah.
Firstly, the Green Adelaide Board have there's one set key matters that you there's a lot of work that has to get done in terms of reshaping the city, building a better city, is around design. So what influences that so we are trying to within government, the board have talked to state planning commission, they made submissions to the first generation code. We'll actually do it influence in terms of office that actually have the staff sitting in the planning group as it rolls out. So I think I can say the board and Green Adelaide know that the planning code is so there's a whole lot of other influences, of course, on the planning design code and all of the statutory planning legislation. I think we often have this very similar to local government, and we'll try to slowly through stuff, but there might be times that we actually have to step outside and either make constructive criticism or initiate programs that might influence with data and some policy furthering back in the planning code. So I guess we hope we've got some influence. We know that it doesn't have all the influence absolutely, so we'll team up with other people to make the changes.
It's interesting. Some potential tensions and opportunities in there. Maggie, what about from a local government perspective? You talked about partnering with state government, one of your final conclusions. Where does something like planning and design code fit in for you in terms of what you're trying to achieve within Port Adelaide Enfield?
Specifically the project assessing, and one of the big issues that will come live once the button's pressed on the new code. Friday, is it? Okay. Is around, particularly for Enfield and the new streetscape and high level crossovers to allow more dense development. That actually compromises the available parking space at streetscapes. And it does mean, I think, that there's a greater dependency on pre-lodgement discussions with developers. But that's okay when you've got a larger scale development and a developer who's engaged in that process. But when it's a small sort of mum and dad developer, clearly they're not necessarily going to be in a negotiation. So I think the minimum standards make it harder. But time will tell. There's different pathways that sort of need to satisfy the pathways. So I think there's great work that all sensitive SA did in terms of getting the provision around all sensitive urban design into those provision, particularly for the input policy areas. It's a good, there's been some good outcomes there. So time will tell. I think pre-lodgement and having the greater sophistication around urban design-based discussions.
So clearly, from a council perspective, that state-based planning approach is significant. And Julian, what about from the ACT government perspective projects? I know it's a territory, it's not a state, but similar sort of ambition there. How does, I suppose, territory level planning factor into the type of work you've been doing there?
So it is the key design mechanism. So it's leading. It's the main input. So I think they're really concerned about heat. I mean, it's a Canberra's a place of extreme heat. Right? They're extreme heat and extreme cold for Australian standards, and they're really looking at a lot on scale what can we do and what can we do factoring in the future growth, and how can we ensure that our new neighbourhoods are cooler than the paddocks that they're building on.
Great, so let's keep moving. So table in the middle here, do we have a question from the table in the middle?
Besides livability, what benefits to the status of a natural park city by Adelaide?
So the first, besides
livability.
Okay. So I do actually think it is a catalyst. I might mention that earlier. It's like an overarching banner that you can actually deliver a whole lot of green programs. I'm hoping it is a good proportion of the community will have some understanding of it, and even enough. It doesn't have to be a deep understanding, but just a supporting it. It's a good thing to be a national park city. I do think then it's that catalyst to actually get more support, I guess, from both community and the finances to deliver biodiversity type programs. And I did mention Field River before, but if that becomes an iconic project, it sort of matches up with Glenfield, another iconic project. There are different national park things that we would have thought of 20 years ago. Because it's more about people, perhaps, biodiversity.
So building on the question, I mean, it's interesting, you mentioned a couple of times this idea of it being a catalyst. Are there any observations from what's been happening in London around which demonstrates the sort of the value that it's been delivering to that community?
Yeah, there's not a lot of new space in London, but it seems that it has it's been very much a human well-being driven thing. That the evidence we're seeing is people are appreciating their green spaces, and when they talk green spaces, they talk a 1 square metre patch of lawn out the front of your terrace home. You might be attracting butterflies to, or people having citizen science around red fox appearing in the suburbs. We do it for other reasons here, but so it seems to be they're proving that it's more about humans interacting with whatever open space, natural space they have.
It's got this image of you encouraging foxes back in as part of a rewilding effort. I think there's a bit of a theme there going, Brent. We're on dangerous ground. Sharon, your table at the back there. Is there a question from your table?
Yeah, we've got a couple, but Greg was going to go first.
The table's disaggregated, so I don't know where to go here. So we'll go Greg first. Okay.
And this one was specifically for Maggie, and that was about the, I suppose the differences, the fights, the constraints that you have internally when you've got this vision. There's a bunch of you guys working toward this lovely vision of improving the tree canopy, showing the business case for it. You've got elected members that are also pushing for that. How do you get the not so adventurous within the organisation to move along with you and not be an actor?
I've been around a lot of times. There's like over 3 decades in local government, and I just think that there's windows of opportunities that arise at different times. The ducks line up. Sort of Maryland Council, when we were first sort of advocating for Field River as a national park concept back in mid-1990, so it took 25 years. I just think you have to have your eye on that a lot of what we're facing in terms of integration around systemic approaches, whether it's coastal adaptation, whether it's urban design, land-based landscape mapping and economic analysis, is this change of practice and change of discipline, and you have professions within that have particular ways of approaching issues. So we are doing a lot of internal work, as you know well, to sort of build common understanding around to shift. So for the last 3 years, we've had a particular focus on building biodiversity capacity, so changing positions, looking for new skill ways to bring them in, and then we'll be going out to market with a new position around greening that will support this program. So what we're bringing in is a new skill base with the relevant operational ability, but strategic sort of stakeholder management. So I think you just got to have your eye on the long game and realise it's not going to happen. And you also realise, so the issue about the planning code, at different times of planning functions and something there's been a mismatch between capacity and the individual officers assessing the application. There's a lot of selectivity, interpreting planning provisions, and it relies on their interpretation, and I think that's what we're going to find in the design club. So it's a sector involved in the sense of the design and the practitioners, the professionals, and building equipment. So yeah, I know know you've got some internal knowledge about what it's like in our organisation, but I can see that there's real shifts happening. And there's a real, so, and also we've got really active communities, so it's not just the active members and staff, it's the triangle community government. So, anyway, there's the triangle, we always keep on. So, our community keeps us alive.
So, Maggie, what happened to open that window of opportunity?
I think it's you know, leadership, different leadership changes, policy shifts, we have bushfires, we have a pandemic. So it's just whatever the triggers are, there's different. But a lot of it does rest off leadership, whether that's national policy, central state policy. So I can see green Adelaide in terms of shifts within agencies and then working across government, but it is about trying to find those points where you work on shared objectives. I'm optimistic.
Going back to our disaggregated table, was there another question? Yeah, Sharon.
Yeah, we also wanted to know, Maggie, the work you're doing, which sounds fantastic, surrounding local government areas, surrounding councils, what opportunity or leverage do you have to influence the way they're behaving, which isn't necessarily as good as you, in terms of tree canopy and the work they're doing? Do you have relationships where you can like help this work flow out the river?
Well, I'm thinking examples of councils far more progress than us. So, Olga has got a really well developed legal program, ambitious targets, 10-year program, and they're well on the way. I mean, it's a different geography there. West Torrens, our neighbour, you know, they've done a lot of work on what's design, tree planting, mine services, and you know what they're doing laneways are becoming more prolific within urban so, and this is an example of what we're doing, but actually we're behind the game. There's some other councils that have other approaches. Burnside are doing some great work around their forest management and the citizen science work they're doing there. So, I have to say, local government situation works really quite well collectively. Like we've had an environment network of practitioners for nearly 30 years. And then we've got regionally on climate change adaptation, which is now the network. I think we're up London coordinated roles for that. So there's a lot of co-learning. And in fact, CSIRO working on some project said it's really weird looking into South Australia the way we work so well together. I said it's not typical of the other states. Why that is, who knows, but it's an advantage that we have.
Yeah, Brenton, yep.
I absolutely appreciate the climate change application. But then there are groups like Garrett and Adelaide, regional organisation councils. I think one way model is close together. I think we have noticed that practitioners are getting onto it, and sometimes the leaders aren't aware. So there's still work to do, but councils really good.
Yeah.
And Julian, coming back over you around the notion of Windows opportunity, and you talk about the ecosystem of tools and frameworks, do you think that ecosystem is a hindrance as windows of opportunity open up, or is it actually a good thing?
I think it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to explore the use of those tools and find where they fit. Everyone to know finding the timing, how they want to use that.
Yeah, okay. So mix and match. Now we're going to keep tracking our tables around. I'm not sure whether this was we might actually come to this table over here, and then we might come back to you for another question. So Melissa, your table, was it yourself or Peter or others?
So we have Julian. So the question for you is, which of the tools is suitable for reporting, suitable for using regulatory frameworks when we develop? So you showed us quite a few tools, and we were like, wow, which one would you get developers to use for either self-assessment, like pre-lodging self-assessment, or as an application supplementary piece of information?
So I think it depends on the size of the development first of all, and how much information you want the developer to provide. So I think for really fine-grained detail, an application like MBMAT for a larger building, I think it gives the best detail. So it has the most options in terms of what you can turn on and off, but it takes a long time to build that model, and having the computing power, you need particular computers to run MBMAT. So it's not something that you can just download and do yourself. So you need to find the person that is a specialist in it, and then their time is going to be valuable because they're a specialist in what they do, and it will take a long time to run that model. So in terms of it being applicable to developers trying to save money, it may not be, but it will provide the best information. And SolWork, similar, but a little bit quicker, doesn't require the same computing power. So you can also get very good information from SolWork as well, which might be more appropriate and we could achieve.
Okay. We have team.
Are there any additions to the questions from the table there? Looks like everyone's pretty happy. We might come back, Martin, over the table here. Did you, or were you part of this? You're part of that group. Okay, so we've got only about 2 or 3 minutes left. Are there any general questions from the floor for any of our panellists? Anything that you think we haven't covered up until now that we ought to consider? Yep.
So this is kind of a personal thing for me, but it's related to what we've been talking about. In my neighbourhood, I, as an individual, have been connecting the people in my neighbourhood together, and we've had several community get-togethers over the last couple of years, and there's probably about 30 or more people all up who do come at different times. And my aim was to sort of to help raise awareness and education about the whole issue of biodiversity and planting and all the rest of it. And now we've got sort of like a core group of maybe 7 of those people who are active in action stuff, and the rest are interested, but just not going to action stuff. But so we have a core group now. So we're at a stage of what do we do in our neighbourhood to encourage biodiversity and stuff like that. We've talked about the fact we've got several reserves, which we would like to see lift. And they would have to be linked through private backyards, largely. And so, but there still seems to be a bit of a gap between what I'm trying to achieve and what I do to go to the council, particularly councils, in order to make it happen. Like this, I'm just wondering what that link is there. So, because from your side, you're sort of saying we need that individual and private engagement, and from my side, as just an individual who has connected with my community, I'm saying, what do we do, or what can we do, I guess, or what support can we get, or what direction, or just what's
So maybe a question for Maggie and Brenton around. It's almost private green corridors. How do we encourage them and coordinate them? Maggie or Brenton, you looks like you're going to lead away.
I might start. So clearly, our councils are really important, and volunteer support and giving guidance to community groups about what some of the best actions you can take. The old AMLR had a nature education team. In our own education then, and they're reshaping, and they are supported. They work out KSAD and out of local government. I actually think the sort of problem you're putting forward is maybe an area where that small team, as part of Great Adelaide, might actually find a role to work between communities and councils to do some of that. So I'm not saying it's ready right now, and I'm sure it happens in pockets, but that's an opportunity.
That'd be great, that sort of thing to so that team that works very well with councils as well. So it's it's a very live issue for us as well, in terms of it's obviously getting to increase the plants and we're getting approaches to the kids, so what do we do? So there's a little bit about the
as well. They're already self-organising, probably ahead of the game as well. My advice is I don't know the groups in your area too well. It's a way of either running up in another group. Had a long I don't really think if trees got off, yeah, so that two groups there. Yeah, I mean that would be one. The other one is it's outside your area, but there's a natural resource centre at Green Adelaide. It's quite fun that's now the Port Environment Centre. Yes, no, but yeah. So I'm going to touch on that. So there are people that are beginning to talk about setting up green groups, group Port Environment Centre, and then we're looking about how we can support that as part of our green strategies. So that's part funded by.
And there's one that close to probably the Northern Summit as well, which Green Adelaide's that area, but it's probably close to you and can help you as well.
So private greening clearly going to be a big issue for local and state government moving forward, and how to encourage and facilitate it. It has to be able to meet our targets. We've got time for one more question before we wrap up the session. Do we have any final questions? Yep.
Sorry.
Luke.
Probably more to Brendan, but how do you make biodiversity part of a business as usual for, say, the building and the construction industry?
Yeah.
So, good question.
Yeah, because I do feel like a little bit with the rhetoric has been more about getting green life. I'll use that term rather than biodiversity. And I was at something this morning with all of the landscape boards where one of them said, "Oh, it seems like biodiversity is not important anymore." I mean, I think it still is. It is to Green Adelaide, but there might have to be different mechanisms or even different research or to bring it back to the fore. And I think in urban environments, recognising what was once here won't be able to be here into the future. So what's the practical biodiversity? So I haven't got the answer for you, but it is it's at the forefront of our minds of how to help people do that.
I think it's a good point to leave us on. So can you please join me in thanking our speakers for this afternoon? And we're now going to have about a half an hour break. And then my understanding is when we get to around 3 o'clock, Melissa will come back on and provide some more, or provide further presentation. And then we join a national feed again. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm just going to just do a quick presentation on what the new knowledge platform looks like. That will replace the CRC's website, and where all the research that we spoke about today helps you navigate how to access it.
Great. Excellent. Thanks, Melissa. Thanks, everyone. So we've got some afternoon tea out, the side tea and coffee as per this morning. Great. Thank you.
Okay, we've mixed up the program a bit. Hope that's not too inconvenient for anyone. I'm sorry to anyone who's online right now and wondering where we disappeared to for the last half an hour. We've been having afternoon tea. So we're going to do the knowledge platform now. And then we'll go switch in about 20 minutes. We're going to switch over to the final session and the final national session. So my job now is to just give you a bit of an overview of the knowledge platform. So that's a really fancy word for a new website. But it is very different. So if you can imagine the CRC website started, there were 5 old historical research programs. There were 5 new themed areas. And it sort of grew as a bit of a beast. And even if you knew what you were looking for, like me, sometimes you still had a bit of a challenge finding things. But the search engine was really good. It's not without its challenges when something gets that big. So what's happened now is there's some theme pages have been set up, and it's been basically remodeled with the user in mind rather than probably research programs written for a government grant in mind. So hopefully what you'll find now, I'm going to take you through a demo of it in a moment, but hopefully what you'll find is like a logical pathway for you to find what you need. And there's certainly still the search engines in there that you can look for things, but hopefully it'll all just be a natural progression for you. But just in a summary, you've got 1,800 tools and resources that have been produced by the CRC over the last 9 years. open access. Steve asked me before, what will we need a new login? The answer is no. So all of the resources, because once the CRC ends, all the IP becomes public good. And so really, if you were a partner before or you weren't a partner, doesn't matter, because now you can access all the resources, the final version of the resources online. There was a login capability for partners previously to see drafts, etc. Some of the tools, they've got a little disclaimer there. Some tools have a fee to support ongoing maintenance. The only one that I'm fully aware of that will definitely be is the value tool that I spoke about in my talk, where you had the non-market values all in a database. That's really only just so it can be kept up to date. Because that's quite resource intensive. Someone's got to do, trawl through the literature, update the database, and make sure it's been entered into the database in a consistent format with the structure. But it's a very valuable, once you see it, it's a really valuable tool and asset. So certainly a fee for service for that one if you're doing benefit cost analysis on a regular basis. I think I don't know what the CRC is going to be charging, but I certainly think it's value for money. I've used it extensively in the couple that I've worked on. Obviously, everything's all in one spot, and as I said, hopefully the structure suits you. So I'm going to switch in a minute to the knowledge platform itself. You'll see that it's there's sort of like a water wheel. You better pick your theme from it, and it'll take you through to research, tools, case studies. But you still have the search engine, and then yes, what's all set it all for me? I've probably already and there's a lot of case studies on there as well. Over the time, the CRC's not only done case studies on their own projects that they've initiated, but they've also pretty much tried to pick exemplars out in the industry and have written up case studies on those that hadn't been well documented in the past. So you'll find access to a range of case studies there. And you can obviously, if you already know what you're looking for, you can search by title, location, or author. And there is a virtual guide. So that's the new one for me. So we'll find the virtual guide once we hop on and see if we can take you through that. And yeah, hopefully everything's in one place. So it's the website is, I'll just take you to it now. You can probably put it in your phone if you like. watersensitivecities.org.au. That's the new website. So I'm just going to take you through one of the themes that I'm most familiar with. Oh, hello. Oh, does it? Okay, thanks for that, Catherine. So for anyone online, if you type in the old CRC website address, it will take you to the new knowledge platform. Okay, so I'm just going to take you through urban metabolism. That's one of the themes that we have very common today. That's that work that Steve Kenway was talking about. A lot of that is under this theme. So you can go through, and there's a few themes. You can look at water efficiency, urban metabolism, and resource recovery, and water sensitive infill. I'm just going to click on that one because that's the one I know. Okay. So then once you get into the theme page, you'll just get a bit of an overview, and then you've got these key tabs. So you can search, obviously, for what you need. All the research is in one place. All the tools and guidelines are in one place, and then there's a series of infographics. So if you're looking for something to sort of put in your own presentations or use, there's some tools there. So I'll just show you in terms of the research. You've got the case studies that I spoke about the Salisbury case study, but there was also one done for WA in a place called Knutsford. That's a really great case study. Again, it's more of like a large-scale infill done by a public housing authority, but really worth looking at if you've got a real keen interest in that type of scale of development. And then it's got the Central Park water scheme, and then under here, you might have heard Jamie talk about yesterday, or it might have been this morning. There was a lot of ideas for projects that were done, and that's when the CRC went in and used their research and helped people to sort of flesh out options. So there's quite a few of those in there, and the Salisbury final report is in there. So that's where you'll see all the analysis that Steve went through in his 10 minutes that we allocated to him, which was quite cruel, is now contained in that report, so you can download it there. Anyone stop me if you need to at any point. Quite happy to go in a different direction. So in terms of what other tools and guidelines are under this theme, the Enfield Typologies Catalogue, so that's the series of designs that the architects developed for lot scale, sort of for, you know, individual houses at apartment scale, townhouse scale, and then streetscape scale solutions of better design. And we're hoping that that will be picked up and run with and start influencing design guidelines under the Planning and Design Code. You've also got the Infield Performance Evaluation Framework, which is actually that radar or spider diagram that you saw Steve in his presentation. It's actually the entire framework in there. So so you've got your guidelines, and then just showing you the last bit of resource, the infographics. In this case, you've got a bit of a snapshot of the framework. You've got the sort of the detailed indicators and outputs that that Steve went through, and I've got to admit that is a really handy framework. I've used it myself several times, and it really does help you go from what a designer needs to know to what community, and I think it's excellent. We heard we heard Julian talk about the Solweg tool in the Salisbury case study. Having a bit of a Kerry Nice did an analysis of a whole series of site scale designs using Solweg, and that's looks to me like a snip of one of those, or that might be Knutsford, but it's he did the same thing. So at Salisbury, if you want to go in and have a look at how these designs are performing from an urban heat point of view, that's all contained in the Salisbury report, but that's just a bit of a snapshot of what that looks like. And then the final infographic is a snip out of that typologies catalogue that shows you how you can go from a you know, what would be traditionally like probably a 1 into 2. Now you can go 1 into 3, still get the yield, still get get better yield, better water management, and more green. And it really shows you in these really good isometric images of where the green spaces are, where the blue, so people can start thinking about how they lay out their lots quite differently. So that's just a snip, but it's just it's an example of what you can do. So, oh yeah, there you go. There's another framework infographic for you. So there's something like that for every theme that's coming through. So I'll go back to the home page. Where'd my wagon wheel go, Catherine? It's a bit weird. Sorry, don't know what I just clicked then. Oh, it's a search function. So has anyone got a topic that is dear to their heart that they would like me to try and find something for them? Street trees? All right, let's have a look. Oh dear, now it's taking its time. I'll try. Oh, I didn't like it. Just when you thought you could have no more technology issues. I was just thinking. Okay, let's try, see what comes up. Okay, from an urban heat point of view, new passive irrigation guidelines to call our cities, and a case study in Dubbo. So, and then temperature and thermal comfort effects of trees. So hopefully whatever you were looking for under there you might find it. So you've got guidelines, you've got case studies. That passively irrigated streetscapes guideline, if you haven't seen that before, really great document, pulls together, if you're trying to do passive infiltration, particularly at the streetscape scale, it picks probably every context that you could imagine doing, whether it's a curb and gutter, if you've got under drainage, if you don't have under drainage, it's got schematics for a whole heap. And there's also a design table for South Australian conditions in the back of the guidelines. So you can size up your infiltration systems for Adelaide's conditions. So, yeah, hopefully that will meet your needs. And I suppose if there's something that you know existed in the old website that you feel hasn't transitioned for whatever reason across to here, by all means let us know and we'll make sure it is, because you know, I'm sure most of it has, but there's a risk that, you know, anything could have dropped off.